Welcome to the Greater Sacramento Valley's Chamber Business and Focus webinar series. Today, our topic is hiring during and post-pandemic, or employment in general. We're very fortunate today to have our amazing expert, Russell Lookadoo. Russell is the president and chief strategist of HRchitecture, a consulting firm specializing in helping business leaders accomplish their goals by effectively using their teams. Russell brings 3 decades of experience designing and implementing performance management, motivational, and reward solutions that achieve business strategies in organizations ranging from a small manufacturer to the second largest bank in America. Russell is the only consultant in the area to combine this broad human resources background with a decade of practical advising with small businesses. This unique combination allows him to work closely with business owners and key leaders to find solutions to their business challenges and align the vision of the owner with that of the company. Growing up, Russell worked in the family business selling and repairing bicycles, which gives him firsthand experience in business with the challenges and rewards that ownership has. While in college, Russell participated in a summer internship program that provided insight into many different organizations and cultures. And in his career, he's consulted with top leaders, as you already heard, in manufacturing companies and banking, as well as municipal government and retail organizations. He's implemented solutions that increased employee retention in the information systems arena, created and improved career ladders for public safety professionals, enhanced job satisfaction, and aligned management focus in the retail sector. And just as a reminder, what we're talking about today is, as you know, the spread of COVID-19, which hopefully is going to diminish really soon, as we've already seen as the vaccine has been rolling out, is requiring employers to begin reopening their businesses and welcoming back their employees. And employers need to be ready to confront the issues concerning a post-pandemic workplace. So this webinar is going to cover, and probably more because Russell's already revamped a little bit, navigating the end of the stay-at-home orders and when employees can come back to work. As most of you know, Los Angeles County is probably moving into the red tier today, which means in LA County means next week, because they'll rewrite this blueprint for reopening just for LA County. He's going to talk about issues concerning safety of employees and how the workplace will change after COVID-19 dissipates, retreats, and what potential legal claims employers can face. And with that, also, I am not going to be here. We have a staff workshop going on. So Steve is your moderator today, Steve Rydeen, our board chair. You can put questions into the chat and he will moderate them from there. So if you could kindly all mute yourselves during Russell's presentation and put your questions in the chat.
Hey, just by chance, do you know that this is on?
Yeah. Because people are talking. That's what I was
As
just talking about. What?
As you said, mute yourself, and that will help.
I know. But, so please, like I said, mute yourselves. That would be really helpful. And I'm just going through and muting who I can. And with that, Steve will be here. And I thank everyone for being here today. We are also streaming this live on Facebook. We will trim this after the meeting. It will probably be posted on our YouTube channel Monday or Tuesday of next week. And that way you'll be able to share this with other people in your office as well. And with that, Russell, take it away. And Steve, I'll talk to you later. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good workshop.
Bye,
good
Donna.
Morning. Good morning. I understand we have a good group of people here. If you do have questions, Steve, if you'll just interrupt me if you think it's a timely question. I'll leave that to your discretion, but you guys put your questions in here. I've got a ton of stuff. We only have about a little less than an hour, which I respect that, but let me jump right in. First off, happy Coronavirus Day, Coronaversary. We were talking, chatting a little bit before we came on. That about a year ago, Nancy asked me to do a similar workshop on what do we do? All of a sudden we're working at home. What do we do? So that was a year ago. And I made comments like, when this is over in 3 or 4 months, 2 months this summer, because that's the information we were getting at the time. Well, here we are, March of 2021, almost April, saying, gosh, another couple months, who knows? Nancy introduced me. I do want to make sure you guys understand that I'm not a lawyer. And I'm not giving legal advice, and the situation is changing by the hour. And I'm updating information as required. But it looks like we're at the end of the trail. It looks like, we're going to red. That's obviously halfway across the spectrum. So everything's not open, but there is a tunnel at the end of the road. I don't know where the light is yet, but we're getting close. As Nancy said, here are the topics. I reordered them a little bit. I want to tell you the first two topics I'm going to not breeze through, but cover at a very high level and give you resources, because it is changing at the moment, particularly when these safer at home or workplace restriction requirements begin to mitigate. We'll spend a lot more time on the workplace changes, how to manage in the new world. Like I said, this is changing all the time. Gavin's coming on our TV all the time, or he was daily, interrupting my wife's favorite TV show. So I know she'll be glad to see that over. But every time you open up a browser, there's a new update. For example, stay-at-home orders, gyms at 10%, but that changed. Amusement parks, 15% capacity. Restaurants, movie theaters, houses of worship, which by the way is encouraged, not mandated, based on the Supreme Court ruling. The Dodgers are opening up April 1st. Salons, all these are currently at 25%, zoos and museums. Retail is at 50%. As of today, the restriction on bars that don't serve food was lifted, but indoor amusement parks and non-essential offices. So what I do is I encourage you to go to this website, covid19.ca.gov. You can put your county in and you can put your business in, and it will tell you what the restrictions are for your business as they're updated by the folks who make those decisions. So don't disregard the slides I just showed you. Just know that it is complicated because it is by business, by county, and even within a county, the local health departments, if there are, can override that. It's very locally driven. It can be driven more open. It can be driven to more restriction. It can't be more open than the state level. So this is a great website to go in. This was updated at 8:30 last night, so it stays fairly current. Might have been updated since we got on this call. We're still going to have some of the social restrictions and the habits, and quite frankly, I think some of these are ingrained permanently. I think we've seen the end of the handshake, the elbow bump, or just standing at a distance, which a lot of cultures already had. Kind of a deep aside, a handshake was so that you didn't have a gun in your hand or a sword or a knife. That's the way handshakes started. It was a way of saying, hey, I'm unarmed. I don't think we need that much anymore. Let's talk about when your business can open and is opening, how you bring people back safely. Now, this is a concern that's legal, but it's also a concern of any business owner. You don't want to unnecessarily expose your employees to danger. In September, the state of Utah, the state of California, where did that come from? Created an employer's playbook. Now, this is a 38-page document that goes into great detail about what you need to do. And in fact, you need to have a playbook in place for your business for the right thing to do. But also, if you have an exposure, they may ask you, let's see your plan. Let's see your plan. This book outlines how to create a plan. One of the key things I think you start with is have somebody in your business who is your local COVID contact. They are the ones that you ask to stay in touch with the authorities, the health department. But if there's an exposure, they need to enact whatever is in this plan. You need to have this poster up, and it's available on page. This goes into the confusing world of what leaves kick in. Is it sick leave? Is it required sick leave? Where does the Families First Corona Recovery Act key in, and other leaves? This poster may be dated now again, but you still need to have it up. Legal claims. Well, you know something? This is actually a billboard on Magnolia Boulevard that I took about a year ago. I took this picture, so I take credit for it. Regardless of what you do, and this is the truth, you don't have to be wrong to be sued. You can be right and still be sued. In California, you've got two things that are of concern. One, there are a lot of plaintiffs' attorneys in employment law who make a lot of money by saber rattling. They know that if they scare you, you'll settle. You settle a claim instead of going to adjudication, $20,000, they get a third of that. That's how they feed their families. In California, you also have the private advocacy law. You don't even have to have an attorney or a state ruling. So having this workbook in place, having the plan in place is your first defense should you get sued. Cal OSHA has an extremely extensive resource on temporary safety standards. Cal OSHA is the agency in California that's responsible for making sure you have a safe workplace. So they updated their standards in January, and you can go to their site and pull down a 40-page book on what the standards are. So I'm not going to take time to go through those materials. We can certainly do that one-on-one. They have this, again, the Cal OSHA COVID-19 prevention plan. There are some exclusions where you don't have to do that. If you have everybody in a workplace, you don't have to worry about it if they're all working remote. If they're covered by another law about aerial borne disease exposure, that governs. And if they are working and they don't talk to anybody, like a toll booth, a technician who works at night, security guard, who doesn't encounter people, they're not required. But for the most part, you are required. So again, there's a resource called the Prevention Plan that goes into extensive detail of what to do, particularly if there's an exposure. This is where you need to have a response in place. My advice when an employee tells you I've been exposed, you send them home immediately. If they call you before work and say, I've been exposed, you don't come in. You go get tested. You bring the written results of that test to me. And then based on the results of the test, we may still have you stay at home for 7 days, 10 days, whatever your local health department requirements are for quarantine. Same is true if they notify you that they traveled to another state or another country. There are quarantine requirements if you travel into the local area that are based on the local health department guidelines. In the San Fernando Valley, the health department's located in Van Nuys, and they are available to help you. Get that phone number and they will call. Steve, you have a question? Okay. Now let's talk about vaccinations. Nancy mentioned vaccinations a few minutes ago. Now, vaccinations are very aggressive right now, and that's a wonderful thing. Because, here's the advice on vaccinations. A lot of people, it is a emotional issue. There are people who are very passionate about everybody being vaccinated, saying everybody should have to be. There are people who are passionate saying it's against my beliefs to be vaccinated. Nobody should be vaccinated. As a business owner, I recommend you simply don't have a position. If you have required in your workplace, there was a webinar that the chamber offered with Steve, what's the name of the law firm? Landberger, I believe it is. Those folks gave an extensive webinar on the legal implications of requiring vaccinations. I was able to sit in on that webinar, but they are the experts, again, legally. When you require any type of medical treatment, there needs to be a bona fide business need to do that, not your comfort level. And even if you do, you have to accommodate those people who have religious objections or medical conditions that prohibit them from being vaccinated. If it's a medical condition, the Americans with Disability Act has an interactive accommodation process. If it's a religious accommodation, quite frankly, you have to be consistent, but you can't require it unless you have a really strong public safety need to have vaccinations. For example, a lot of places require hepatitis in a medical setting. So it's similar to that. If you want to require vaccinations, check with an attorney. here's the population. According to the Society for Human Resources, 60% of the people say, yeah, I'm going to get the shot. 28% are saying, I'm willing to quit if you require me to get a shot. 12% are unsure. So it's not a slam dunk, regardless of which you're in the green section or the red section or in the yellow section. So you as an employer have to be aware of this diverse opinion. That's pretty much what I wanted to talk about in terms of when you can return, how you can return. And again, I know we did it at a very high level, but what you do, what the workplace looks like post-pandemic, as we come out of the pandemic, and even long-term effects after the pandemic. And this is something that is of great concern to the economy and to you as an employer. I have clients that are in the construction business, architects, engineers, general contractors. If they've been planning to build new offices, they're concerned about their future. They're diversifying their strategy, because what we're going to end up with, and I'll show you why I believe this, is we're never going back to the way we were. Now, never is a thing I never say never, never. So, you get yourself, it's kind of like that old thing. You ever got a fortune cookie that says never take advice from a fortune cookie? That's a conundrum. But I believe it is highly unlikely that we'll ever return to the expectation that you're in the office, everybody has to be here. Does that mean you can't do that? Sure, you can do that. But here's what companies are saying. 6% of companies have already said, and a lot of these are in the essential businesses, we're back now. We never went remote. 32% plan to say, we want everybody to come back. 21% says we'll never require everybody to come back. 41 are still wait and see. So again, and this is a Towers, human resources firm, Towers Watson, who did this research. They followed up and said, what do the employees want? Almost 60% say, I want the flexibility of working from home, at least part-time. That's the hybrid. So 2/3 of the employees, 60% of the employees are saying, I don't want to have to come to the office all the time. 41% are saying, I want to be in the office. So again, you look at those two slides, we've got a lot of demand, both from the companies and from the employees, to maintain this flexibility. And I think it's a great thing. I have a client who had really difficult time hiring account managers. Beginning in March of last year, their account managers all began to work remotely. Working with my client, I said, well, you can't find people in the local market. They hired 4 account managers that have never been on their premises. So it opens up the landscape of recruiting to no barriers if you have everything in place. And we'll talk about what that means. Here's another fact, and this has a double-edged sword. In this same survey, 25% of women said, I never wanted to come back to the office full-time. It was a higher percentage than men, but there's also a lot of evidence to show that we're in Women's History Month, Women in Business Month, there's a tremendous amount of data emerging that the work-at-home employee is not as committed. Therefore, I don't have to worry about their pay, give them increases, give them bonuses. So any pay disparity, which is a fact, has a risk of being compounded. Monica has a question. Monica, if you'll put that in the chat.
Sure.
Or I guess if you want to ask it, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. It might be easier. So with regards to requiring employees to get the vaccine, because we're dealing with cancer patients in our office, is it possible to require new employees to get the vaccine, but not necessarily the current ones?
Okay, I want to defer you to a lawyer on that, but here's my general non-legal advice. I wouldn't differentiate new employees from existing employees, because then you pierce the reason for it.
Okay.
If the reason is, and you're in a medical industry, a healthcare industry, the circumstances for those in healthcare providers are very different than if you're running a, I don't know, an advertising agency
Mm-hmm.
like Steve, an advertising products company. Because of the risk of your patients, you probably have a bona fide reason to require that. But again, I would want you to consult with an attorney, and I can refer you to a great one. When you do it, you have to be across the board. You have, that's why I say don't differentiate new hires versus existing hires. You want to look at, do they have patient contact? My sister works for a hospice. She never has patient contact. She's a scheduler. I wouldn't require that function too, although you have the contact with the people who do have contact. So it's pretty gray. Does that help, or did that confuse
It does. No, thank you.
Who gets to come back? When you begin to phase back in having people who have been working remotely, and right now, I say non-essential businesses don't have this ability to do this, but you may want to first ask for volunteers. Consider, and I think you're going to be required to consider the ongoing remote work. What is their business function, as I just discussed with Monica? Do they have a bona fide business reason to come to work? And there's some jobs that do. If I'm a front desk employee, I can't work remote. If I'm a manufacturing employee, I can't work remote. If I'm a food service worker, I can't work remote. But the person who orders the French fries for the restaurant possibly could. What are their duties? The most important criteria, though, if you look at those 2/3 of the employees that don't want to come back, it's very important that you as a leader look at their performance remotely. There is no entitlement to work at home. And that's an important thing. If they are struggling, have them come back in. If they're new, have them come into the office or the workplace. Because if their performance is fair to unsatisfactory, and it is in large measure because of the remote workforce, bring them back. So as always, and this is my philosophy with human resources, performance is the key factor. Now, that means you have to have good performance management systems in place so that you can justify that. But that's a whole nother workshop. If you require people to come back and they refuse, they are paranoid or they have a legitimate reason, the advice here is to be compassionate, understand that they're dealing with a real issue or they're dealing with a phobia, but it's real to that person. When I say phobia, it's kind of like psychosomatic illness. That doesn't mean they're not ill. The ADA has a reasonable accommodation process that I recommend you parallel. You don't have to do that. But if they're a top performer or a good performer or a long-term employee, you need to work with them, understand what their issues is, look at what ways you can accommodate them coming back to the workforce. I have a client that has an employee who recently became pregnant. She doesn't want to put her unborn baby at risk. They needed her back in the office, so they put a plexiglass box around her workstation, literally. So there are ways to accommodate the fear, real or not. If you fire them for not coming back to work, according to the Supreme Court just recently, they are eligible for unemployment insurance. And that's a brand new ruling within the last few weeks. So it's not a big deal. Everybody makes a big deal out of unemployment hearings, and they're important. We as a society don't want people on unemployment insurance that don't deserve it. The financial impact for a company is percentages. It's not very big. When you start bringing back people, like everything else, leadership and communication are the crucial criteria for success. Have a plan, have a spokesperson, walk the talk. Again, I'm not getting political one way or another, but the press has had a lot of hay made from political leaders who aren't following the rules on both sides of the aisle. You can't go to restaurants yet I'm pictured in a restaurant. You know, you can't have a party at home, yet the press puts pictures of the parties in your home on the news. You as a leader in your business have the same fishbowl that you live in your business than the governor or the senator or the member of the House of Representatives or the city council have. People watch what you do. So if you're communicating one thing and doing another thing, you're going to have an issue. So walk the talk and have a plan to communicate. Look at your policies and procedures. Is your employee handbook up to date with leaves, with contingencies, with a remote work policy? Let me touch on that just a little bit. One of the things that has evolved over the last year is to have a formal remote work agreement. This is important, and you can contact me and I can work with you to design one for your business, or you can Google it. There's plenty out there. You need to have why you have the policy, who is covered, what the process is to request remote work. The default is you're in the office. So if you're not in the office, what is your reasons for requesting to work from home? What are your availability and attendance standards? One of the issues that continues to come up with good performers when they were in front of you performed well. But if they're remote, how do you know they're working? Well, there's a lot of technology we'll talk about in a second, but you need to say you will be available these hours. When you're not available, who do you notify that you have to step away from work? Just like if they're in the office, just because stepping away from the work means I'm going to run up to the kitchen and make a sandwich. Well, that means you're on break. Notify people you're on break. Have strong productivity and performance standards in the agreement. Make sure the equipment and tech support, including data security, is in place. So I know in the chamber, there's 2 or 3 really good technological consulting firms. I can think of 3 right off the top of my head. Steve, you may know if there's more than that. They can help you with a lot of the remote data security issues. Particularly, and I'm going to pick on you, Monica, if you have remote employees and you're transmitting health insurance issues, you got a major HIPAA problem if that's breached. And you know that. But again, get professional support to make sure that the equipment you send, the internet connections you have are appropriate, can handle the workload, and are secure. Responsiveness measures. I worked with a client and we had very specific standards of time that you respond to an email, that you respond to a text, that you respond to an internal instant messaging system they have, that you answer your phone during certain hours or return voicemail messages within a certain time. Have this in the agreement up front, and then when you have issues, it's much easier to address than hemming and hawing after, oh my gosh, we can never get hold of Steve. He's never around. How does their comp and benefits change? Are they on a different pay program, a different incentive program, or certain benefits not eligible for them? For example, really simple one. A lot of companies have put in transit pass reimbursement. If you're working from home, you don't have transit needs, right? So you need to be clear about that. At what point can it be revoked? What type of conditions will cause you to say, nope, here's our agreement, but you're coming back to the office? Dress code. You've heard the joke about the business mullet. Business on the top, boxers on the bottom. You know, if that's okay for you, that's fine. But I had a situation where an individual was doing work for a very large religious institution. They got a Zoom call and they had a t-shirt on about satanic worship. That was a problem with that client. So you need to have a dress code when you're in screen. By the way, responsiveness and availability. Everyone working remote should have a camera. They're $20 for heaven's sakes. So there should be no excuse. Physical environment. You know, I have upstairs, sometimes you may hear a dog or a baby bark. Dog barks, baby cries, right? Is that how it works? Do they have, you know, the physical environment is not just the noise in the background, but do they have an ergonomically correct workstation? Are they always working with a mouse on their bed? Are they going to get neck injuries, wrist injuries, stress injuries? So you need to inspect their physical environment to make sure it's a suitable work environment ergonomically, as well as from an appearance standpoint. And then, of course, data security. So let's go through the issues of managing a hybrid workplace, because this is reality. There are 4 key areas that need to be addressed proactively. One of the things that shocked business this time last year and in April, you saw a tremendous amount of one-time expenses where you bought monitors for people, you bought chairs, you increased their internet service. You had to buy a whole new workstation for them to work at home, or reimburse the employees who are working from home for purchases they made. That went way up, but now we're past that. You've got that now you've already spent it if you had remote employees. So why throw that away for one hand point? But you also know what it costs to equip somebody, and you don't buy a duplicate workstation anymore. Now I've got one employer who they literally hired a tech company to move everybody's office workstations to their home and set them up. When they quit, somebody has to go get those, which is something I'll talk about in a second. Technology is exploded in the collaboration and remote work environment world. I'm old. I remember the very first Cisco WebEx phone call that I was on in 1996. WebEx, Citrus, not Cisco, it was Cisco, was the very first company to do video conferencing. Now look how many are out there. We're on Zoom right now. I prefer Teams. Some people prefer Google Meet. Some people prefer WebEx. Go to meeting.com. There are so many ways to meet virtually. And there's so many ways to collaborate, like Asana, OneDrive, Smartsheet, SharePoint, Airtable, Monday.com, OneHub. The ability to do this work regardless of where you are has become mainstream now. A year ago, I couldn't say that. A year ago, a third of these weren't on here, maybe half of them. And it's rare to have, particularly with homeschooling. And how many of you saw the news? There was a court case. They're doing WebEx court hearings now. And there was a one hearing, I think it was in Texas, where the defendant got on the WebEx while he was conducting surgery. And the judge said, no, we're not going to allow that. I don't want to put your patient. Oh, don't worry about it. I can multitask. Well, the judge said no. Then they had one this week where a person came on the WebEx from the residence that he had a restraining order not to go into. So it's become almost comically common. But if you don't know what these tools are, talk with a tech company, talk with me, and we'll figure out a way to get your collaboration in place. Once you get the infrastructure, though, including that ergonomic workstation, it's very important to make it work to have the right people. If you have current people, we talked about those that are performing, stay at home. Those that aren't, come in when you get that flexibility. But now when you hire, you have the opportunity to hire anywhere in the world. You don't have to hire in Woodland Hills anymore. Unless, they have to come into the office, like we talked about those companies. For the remote workers, they can be anywhere. But there needs to be a screening elements in the selection and recruiting process to make sure you're getting the right people. I've added questions to my interview list. Tell me about how you handle situation A remotely. And then I listened to how they would handle that. How would you handle interruptions from your family at work? Those are fair questions if you ask everybody, and that's key. You can't just ask the moms instead of the dads. You can't ask the ones if you hear kids when you don't. You have to ask the same questions for everybody. So recruiting changes. I've hired somebody, helped a client hire somebody, never laid eyes on them. Like I said, 4 people. We have to do video conferencing. Well, what if the employee doesn't have the ability to video conference at work? Then how are they going to work remote anyway? So it's an automatic screener, if you think about that. when you're remote working, it needs to be, from your standpoint, exactly the same experience as much as possible as if they were sitting across the table from you. You're dressed professionally, you're on time, you're prepared, you make eye contact, you listen 80% of the time, talk 20% of the time. So the fundamentals of recruiting haven't changed. The channel you use has. Once you've hired somebody, onboarding or orientation also needs to be critical. Several of my clients have videotaped their company culture video and their owner's video so that they get a consistent manage that they used to deliver when they hired somebody. So how do you handle things like rotating lunches so they meet people in the department? I can't answer every question today, but my clients go through, okay, how do you used to do it this way? And we flow chart that out. How do we do that in a remote environment? What are the options? What are the tools? Is it important to do? Is it more important to do? But you don't want to take your eye off of that process as well. The big issue with remote workers is collaboration. And collaboration is when two people are looking at the same problem. You've seen the thing where they look at the 6 and the 9, and it's depending on their perspective, one number or the other, but it's the same object. Collaboration is key to success in many businesses. It's particularly important for new hires and inexperienced employees. I had one team lead over an engineering group who said, I don't have time to check in with all my staff who's working remote. And I said to this individual, how often were you in the office and they just popped in to ask you a quick question? Oh, all the time. And I said, now you have more control. You set up 15-minute windows with all your people, and that's when they call you with their questions. So, but you don't want to shut down that collaboration, which is why some of those technological tools are in place. A lot of my clients are using Microsoft Teams. I'm not selling it, but it has some really cool collaboration features that I haven't seen in some of the other platforms. Slack has some very cool features for collaboration. Workday has some very cool collaboration features. You want to make sure that the avenues that existed when somebody was 6 feet away exist when they're 600 miles away. So collaboration, I kind of jumped ahead on this slide. The next thing is accountability. We talked about the remote work agreement. Accountability is really very simple. Duh. It's the hardest thing you as a leader have to do, is hold people accountable. The reason it's so difficult for many business owners and leaders to hold other people accountable, they don't need that. I'm going to pick on Steve because I know Steve. Steve, you own your business. Who holds you accountable? You do, right? So you don't need somebody holding you accountable. So why does anybody need to be held accountable? Well, they don't own the business. Now, in actuality, it's your customers who hold you accountable, and you feel that directly through an incentive plan called profitability. But an employee on a salary doesn't have that. So you need to, in managing performance, the first step is to very clearly set clear expectations. Without that step, the rest of it falls apart. Provide feedback against those expectations. You ever play racquetball? Racquetball is absolutely no fun if you don't have the wall to hit the ball against. That's the expectation. The feedback is how you respond to each shot. I have a 4-question feedback mechanism. It's a combination of setting expectations so that you can provide the feedback. Here are the 4 questions. Marie, do you understand what it is you're supposed to do? Do you have the tools, information, and knowledge to do that? That's question number 2, Marie. Do you understand you're responsible for doing that? Yes. What is your next step? So if I ask those 4 questions when I set the expectations, when it comes to the feedback, I go back over those questions and say, now what's going on? Why are you successful? Why are you not successful? Feedback originated, that term actually comes from Apollo 8. Feedback is the pinging of information back and forth to the spacecraft to make sure it was on track. So feedback is an incredibly positive tool to keep people on track to be successful. It is not a punishment. Now, periodically you assess performance and you draw a line saying, how you doing? 90 days, 6 months, 1 year, quarterly, bi-monthly. You have an assessment. And at that point, you either improve or you recognize by either rewarding them or terminating them. This cycle does not change because of where the employee is working. The fundamentals, like in hiring, like in onboarding, and performance management are the same. The tools and the intention need to be clear. The most crucial piece in performance management is the frequency of feedback. Now, this is a great chart that was done by Gallup pre-COVID, and I haven't seen an update on this since COVID. But if you look in terms of how the percent of engagement, which is how well your people are involved in your company, are they getting the work done? Do they understand what they need to do? They like working there? Are they proud of their company? Those are the measures of engagement. The more frequent the feedback, the more engaged employees are. More engaged employees can increase the profitability of your company as much as 30%. The secret ingredient is frequent feedback, a few times per week. If you do that versus once a year, you have a 6-fold increase in productivity, regardless of where they work. But let's look at the line of working remotely, 80 to 100%. It is the highest engagement if you dedicate the time to provide feedback on a weekly basis. Now let's talk about those meetings. I pick on my client that's an engineering firm because their life would be perfect if they never had to talk with other human beings. They can email a formula, and that's collaboration to them. But when you have these one-on-one meetings, they have to be sacred. The most important thing a leader does is meet with their teammates one-on-one. The most important thing, if they want to get things done through those people. It's important to schedule those meetings. There's a lot of great tools that set recurring meetings. Google Calendar, Outlook, Teams, Calendly. You can set recurring meetings, click of a mouse. Set a recurring meeting and keep it sacred. I personally prefer, when I had a staff, to do my check-ins first thing in the morning. Depends on the size of staff you have, the biorhythms of the people. But particularly if you have an issue with individuals who have reliability issues, I'll talk about a termination in a second. We were never sure if this person was working. Were they there? Were they out of bed? Were they dressed and showered? Were they focused? Well, if you set an every morning check-in with that person at 7:45, guess what? They'll be there or they'll be gone. Do not allow interruptions. This is the employee's sacred time, which goes into, here's a little graphic about Aretha Franklin taking 5 minutes to sing the national anthem. But time of possession in the one-on-one meetings is the amount of time the employee is talking versus you're talking. Now, as a rule of thumb in an interview, the candidate talks 80% of the time. In these one-on-one meetings, they need to be talking 55 to 60%, if not 70% of the time. You're communicating things and it's interactive so that you're not doing all the talking like I'm doing today. This would not be an effective one-on-one meeting. It's called a webinar. And finally, every single meeting needs to touch on performance feedback. That is the meat on, if you're not vegan, that is the center course of your meal. So these elements of a one-on-one meeting are crucial. Here's an agenda for a one-on-one meeting. You want to be personable. You want to show that you care. That's a key to engagement. How are you doing? I conduct, 25 or 30 coaching sessions a month with clients. I start every one of them. How are you doing? How's your family? What's your stress level? Any COVID exposure? And we small talk for 2 or 3 minutes. And that allows them to say, hey, my boss cares about me. And then you say, what have you done exceptional since our last meeting? And they'll look forward to that question, because if they were in the office with you, hey, look what I just got from my client. I just got a thank you note from my client. And then you say the negative, which is negative. What would you do differently? What didn't go well? What's new that you're working on? How are you doing on your goals or your progress or your projects? Oh, by the way, what can we do better to support you? Now, before we leave, what are the commitments you want to make for the next meeting? And then you wrap up appreciating their work. So that's a 8-point agenda for your one-on-one meetings. Let's talk about terminations. Now, literally 5 o'clock last night, I helped a client terminate an employee during their probationary period, had a lot of hair on it. Very grateful for the attorney that we had help us prepare. But I'm aware of a manager who got a text, I quit. That's the last I heard from him. There are certain things, particularly in California, that have to be done to terminate an employee and mitigate the potential they'll sue you. Now, notice I said mitigate, not eliminate. But there are certain things in a termination procedure that need to take place. At a high level, the 4 things that I always make sure are in place when I've helped a client terminate an employee. In a previous life, I used to terminate people for a living, so I got a lot of scar tissue. Number 1, is the employee surprised? It should not be. Number 2, preserve the dignity of the employee. They have just lost their livelihood. How are they going to keep their family living indoors and fed? You need to preserve their dignity. If severance is appropriate, that's a good reason to have that. Thirdly, after you make sure their dignity is preserved and the information is concise and accurate, you need to protect the assets. You need to protect the other people in the company. Remote, this is actually easier, maybe. I've had terminations where I've had peace officers in the lobby because the person was known to be violent. So I had a peer who was shot when he laid off somebody when I first started work. In person, you want to make sure when you terminate somebody, you're between them and the door, just in case they go off. Remotely, you need to make sure that if you believe there's a reason that they could come to the workplace to extract revenge, that you make sure that your workplace is secure, that you call a police officer where you have a hostile situation. So the safety of the person delivering the termination and the other employees is next. After that, the safety and security of your company's assets and information. In this termination, we had a technician standby that during the conversation, when the information had been delivered, the owner texted the technician, said, cut off access to the network. They're working remote. We made arrangements for a messenger service to be at her home to pick up the company equipment and deliver the last paycheck. That's happened in the last hour today. So I haven't followed up to see if it happened, but that's the plan. So A, is it a surprise? Do they understand why they're being terminated? 2, is their dignity preserved and enhanced if possible? Safety of the people, safety of the company. 5th is notify your customers. Notify your internal employees, this person's no longer with the company. Notify your customers by saying, hey, this person's no longer with the company, Sam's no longer with the company. We're committed to make sure that you have uninterrupted service. Here's your new contact. Don't ever go into why. In fact, a termination conversation with employees, 10 minutes or less. It takes more time to prepare and react to. Challenges, even if you do all these well, customer service is a huge challenge in a remote work environment. A lot of that has to do with availability and appearance and professionalism of your employees. That goes back to expectation setting. But there's some jobs where you need somebody in person. Well, they're going to come back to work first. Information security, we talked about making sure that they have the bandwidth security. There's HIPAA reasons, there's confidentiality reasons. But the big one that leaders need to focus on that aren't check the box items is a fact that people who are working remotely suffer from isolation. Even introverts who say they don't want to talk to people, introverts often have a close connection with a very few people. Mental illness, domestic abuse, and other psychological impacts of a remote workplace have magnified. Now, how do we manage the isolation and that lack of personal touch we had before? Well, you need to develop emotional intelligence. And I do a lot of coaching on that. It is something you can improve. Unlike IQ, your EQ can improve. We can measure it. But when you're checking in with the employee and going through that checklist, you want to be prepared, timed, know their personal dynamic, which is the other reason I ask about what they're dealing with outside of work. Approach them gently. Don't be demanding, but be specific. Be open-ended. Allow them to be involved in the solution. Ask them, don't tell them. But a big key here is, hey, you know something? I'm tired of this remote workplace. Don't you like the fact that we used to play ping pong every day? Let's figure out a way to have remote ping pong. You know, we're not trained mental health counselors. We're just not. There are great employee assistance programs that cost less than $3 a month per employee that I can help you find, or you can find on your own. You need to maintain the company culture. That can be done again. There's a lot of virtual tools. Unfortunately, looking at the time. This is really cool. One of my clients is really struggling because they had a really fun place to work. It's one of these companies you see on the news that have ping pong tables and basketball courts, and they had a what's the shuffleboard court out back. They had rotating lunches. They had, so you can emulate a lot of that online. There's online gaming, there's online trivia contests, virtual breaks, Slack channels, things like that. Showing appreciation. A lot of companies, it was pretty frequent that the boss had pizza brought in or vendors brought meals brought in. We can't graze anymore. But Uber Eats and DoorDash have a program where you can send out and pay for everybody to order a meal at home. Now, they handle all the logistics of who they order, what they order, when it's delivered, but you give them a gift card in essence. DoorDash has a great gift card program. I don't sell them. Uber Eats probably has it too. Bottom line, trust is important. I read a book called Working Remote. It was written in 2014, very ahead of its time. There was a quote in that book that I really believe. If you can't trust someone to work at home, in the sentence, you can't trust them. Doesn't matter where they work. And my charge to you is, why do you have employees on your payroll that you can't trust? Because if you can't trust someone and they can't trust you, which is why walking the talk is important, it's not going to be successful. And you also have to be transparent about what's going on in the company, what's going on with their performance, and just be open and honest with people. There's a list of do's and don'ts that are important. Make sure they have a good workstation. Make sure they have a routine. Communicate proactively. Take breaks. This is what the employee needs to do. Stay organized and have agreements with your family. What an employee doesn't do is mix household chores and work. They're at work or they're not. Procrastination. Let a day slip away. This time of year, by the way, they're having the March Madness again. Expect a loss in productivity. But guess what? You also have that in the office, just not as blatant. Don't binge, work from anywhere, and don't allow distractions. Got a couple minutes, Steve, I think, left for questions. Is there anything?
Yeah, we do. It looks like Holly put one in the chat, just said, do you have an agenda prepared for your one-to-one? And Holly, do you want to expand on that? Or?
Yes, and I think maybe she was ahead of that slide, but there was a slide back there that had an 8-point agenda. And I can certainly make these slides available. Just send me an email. I don't know if the chamber tends to post these things, but I have a meeting. I have an agenda for every single meeting I have. Okay. I hate meetings, so I prepare an agenda to keep them on track. But yes, I do have an agenda, and you can work up a form to where you walk through the form, and that's your agenda. And be transparent about it. This is what I'm going to ask next.
Okay, and Monica, go ahead.
Russell, when you were talking about the employer handbook and making sure that we have a local COVID contact, are you talking about an internal staff person that's like the expert, or are you talking about a local, like somebody from the health department?
Good question, two-part question. I resist putting COVID-specific things in an employee handbook, but you need to make sure there's nothing in your handbook. You should have a separate COVID policy book because that'll get shelved. But if there are things that are contradictory, you need to make sure handbooks in place. You know, we don't pay sick leave. Well, COVID requires you to pay sick leave, things like that. But about your question about a contact that's internal, you need to have one person typically who you trust, but is the go-to person in your company for COVID questions. Therefore, you focus the time and research, and the employees know they have a safe place to go. That person needs to be trained on appropriate confidentiality protocols, and trained on responsiveness protocols. But ideally, it's not the owner, because you got enough on your plates.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, and Holly, go ahead. You got a question.
So Monica actually asked the one that I wanted to know about in terms of having a person there. But Russell, you talked about, because I was thinking, well, who would that person be? And it can't be the owner. So fortunately, I'm the owner, but I also do the HR, as you know, small businesses wearing multiple hats. So then it becomes that thing of, so who?
Well, I didn't mean to sound black and white on that. Obviously, in a small firm, you wear that hat as well.
Right.
I don't know your company. I don't know enough about you, but if you have a safe go-to person who's there, it can be a receptionist. It can be an admin assistant. It can be someone who doesn't have control over that person's destiny, so that it's safe, but they have to be very strictly trained on the confidentiality and the protocols.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But yeah, it can be the owner, and it often has to be the owner, because guess what? You empty the trash if you have to.
True.
I've worked with small businesses for almost 2 decades. I get that.
So one last question, and thank you for clarifying that. In terms of your clients and anybody else that's on this Zoom call, in terms of your staff members that are working remotely, are you making it mandatory that they use the camera when they're on with staff meetings, or is it just one of those things of comfortability?
Of course, I can't tell my clients how to run their business. I don't own their company. But I strongly recommend that they supply the equipment and require that you are on camera during meetings.
Okay.
Because when you're in a meeting in the office, you don't hide under the table. Why is there a different standard? Because they don't happen to be in the same building.
I like that. Okay.
And you can get a camera for $20.
Right.
Camera, microphone. And there isn't a computer unless you got a really, really old one that doesn't have a USB port. That's all you need.
Thank you.
Not an excuse. I don't coach without a camera. I'll put it that way. Well, sometimes they're in the car, things like that. But it's a strong preference of mine to make this level of eye contact. I could do a whole workshop on communication and the percentage of information that's passed non-verbally. The camera helps that. Better than a phone call. Dick Tracy had a video of watch phone back 50, 70 years ago.
Thank you.
All right. And Russell, do you have a slide with your contact info, or do you want to drop that into the chat? There we go. Perfect. So everybody take a look at that, get that information down if you need it, but we'll still keep it open for another few minutes. If anybody has any further questions or clarifications, or maybe something that wasn't addressed that you'd like to get some info on, we can open that up right now.
You can go to the hrguy.biz. There's a contact me box, or just shoot me an email at answers@hrguy.biz, biz.com. And I'd be more than happy to work with you one-on-one in a consultation on this at my expense. At no cost.
Okay, well, I don't see any hands raised, and there aren't any further questions in the chat. So, and we are at 11:03. So thank you everyone for taking your time to be a part of this morning. Russell, thank you for the presentation. I think one of the best analogies that I've heard about where we're at right now is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We're just not sure what that tunnel is going to look like on the other side, and it will be different than where we came from. but that doesn't necessarily mean it's better or worse. It's just different. And as a business owner, it's imperative that you have the practices in place that you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself, protecting your clients, but most importantly, protecting your business. And Russell's a great resource for this to make sure that you've got all of everything covered in this new landscape that we're all going to be facing and dealing with. But together we will get through this, and we'll get it figured out and make it a win for everyone involved. So if there are no further questions or comments, there I see some thank yous in the chat. So yes, thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Russell, again for your time. And Russell, I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, just very grateful to have the opportunity to take an hour of your time. I don't take that for granted.